They laughed so hard, I could hear the echo long after I left the room. That sound, a mix of ridicule and arrogance, used to haunt me. It wasn't just laughter, it was dismissal. And it came from the people who were supposed to respect my ideas, not crush them. Back then, I was just another employee at Hawthorne and Company, a mid-sized tech firm in Chicago. A small fish in a tank full of self-proclaimed sharks. And the biggest shark of them all? Ethan Cole, my boss. Ethan had that type of confidence that bordered on cruelty, the kind that makes people listen because they're afraid not to. He was tall, sharp-suited, and always smelled of expensive cologne and quiet manipulation. He didn't raise his voice often, but when he did, the room froze. I was the head of the digital strategy team, young, driven, and maybe a little too optimistic. I believed hard work would speak louder than politics. I believed talent was enough. It wasn't. Ethan didn't like that I challenged his ideas, especially not in meetings. And when I started gaining traction, when clients began requesting me by name, I became a threat. That meeting, the one that changed everything, started like any other Monday disaster. The boardroom was full. Coffee cups, laptops, and that fake professional energy that smells like stress and ambition. I had spent 2 weeks preparing my presentation, a bold new campaign strategy that could double client engagement. I believed in it. When my turn came, I stood, clicked to the first slide, and began. For the first few minutes, they listened. Nods here and there. A few notes being taken. My confidence grew. Then Ethan smirked. "So," he said, leaning back, voice dripping with false amusement, "you're saying we should scrap the strategy that's been making us millions for this?" The room went still. "I'm saying we could expand our reach by modernizing," he cut me off, chuckling under his breath. "Modernize. Right. With your grand vision." The others followed his lead. A few quiet laughs. Then louder ones. Even Jenna, my so-called work friend, smiled uncomfortably and looked away. The sound built, a wave of amusement crashing over my professionalism. I stood there, cheeks burning, hands gripping the remote. Every word I'd rehearsed vanished. Ethan tilted his head. "Look, Lily," he said smoothly, "you're ambitious. That's cute. But maybe stick to what you're good at, analytics, not leadership." The word cute hit me harder than an insult. It wasn't just the laughter that broke me that day, it was the way they looked at me. Like I didn't belong in the same room. I smiled through it somehow. The professional kind of smile, polite, tight, brittle. "Thank you for the feedback," I said, even as my voice trembled. The meeting ended. My idea was brushed aside, replaced by another one of Ethan's safe plans. And as I gathered my papers, he leaned close, voice low enough only for me to hear. "Next time, don't waste the board's time with fairy tales." That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my reflection in the dark window. My laptop sat open beside me, the rejected presentation still glowing on the screen. Maybe I was foolish to think I could change things. Maybe I didn't belong there. But beneath the humiliation, something else began to stir, something sharp, quiet, and alive. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was awareness. A realization that I had just seen who they really were. That their laughter said more about them than about me. And deep down, a small whisper started to grow. One day, they'll regret laughing. The next morning, I walked back into the office as if nothing had happened. Smile on, shoulders straight, the perfect professional. But I watched. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before, the subtle alliances, the secret favors, the way Ethan manipulated people through flattery and fear. I started keeping notes. Not petty notes, but patterns, business decisions, client losses, internal politics. It was almost like observing a machine, finding the loose screws. And I noticed one thing more than anything else. Hawthorne and Company was not as invincible as it pretended to be. That quiet suspicion that something was cracking beneath the polished surface began to take root. Ethan's arrogance blinded him, and the team's loyalty was skin-deep. They thought they had power. They thought I was small. But power shifts. And arrogance blinds. And one day soon, the same laughter that humiliated me would echo again, only this time, it wouldn't be mine they were laughing at. It would be his. It's strange how silence can be louder than laughter. After that humiliating meeting, no one said much to me for a while, not even the ones who used to stop by my desk for small talk or ask me for help with their reports. It was as if I had suddenly become invisible. And invisibility, I learned, can be the most painful kind of punishment. Ethan, of course, acted as though nothing had happened. He'd still greet me in the mornings with that fake corporate smile, voice honeyed and controlled. But I could feel the shift, a thin, cold layer of distance coating every word. He'd compliment Jenna's work in public, praise Mark's mediocre presentations, but when it came to me, nothing. My name might as well have been erased from the project board. Still, I tried to believe it was temporary, a phase, a bruise that would fade. I kept showing up early, staying late, and doing my job as best as I could. Because that's what I'd always been taught, hard work wins. But hard work doesn't win in a rigged game. A few weeks later, I noticed something odd. Ethan began holding private meetings, leadership sessions, he called them, but my invitation never came. The same people who had laughed in that meeting were suddenly part of his inner circle. One afternoon, I walked past the glass conference room and saw them inside, Jenna, Mark, and a few senior analysts, all leaning close, laughing about something. Ethan noticed me and quickly closed the blinds. My stomach twisted. When I asked him about it later, he smiled. "Oh, Lily, it's just a smaller strategy group. Don't worry, we'll share the highlights with you later." His tone was casual, but his eyes were daring me to protest. So I didn't. I nodded and forced a smile. Of course. But inside, I could feel my chest tightening, that familiar mix of shame and suspicion. The red flags started small. A document missing from my drive. A client email chain that somehow skipped me, even though I was supposed to lead the project. Then, one morning, I found my name removed from a major account. The project I'd pitched, built, and nurtured for months was now under Jenna's management. When I confronted Ethan, he leaned back in his chair and sighed dramatically, as if I were a child asking a silly question. "Lily, it's just business," he said, tapping his pen against the table. "You're talented, but your emotions cloud your judgment sometimes. I need someone more stable leading this account." I blinked. "Stable?" He smiled, slow and deliberate. "Don't take it personally. You're still valuable to the team." Valuable. Like a spare part. That word burned. That night, I stayed at my desk long after everyone left. The office lights hummed softly, the glow of my monitor the only light in the room. I replayed the meeting in my head, the laughter, the looks, Ethan's smirk, and something inside me cracked just a little more. For the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt angry. Not the loud kind of anger, but the quiet, dangerous kind that sits in your chest and waits. Still, I couldn't shake the self-doubt. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe I didn't belong in leadership after all. But every time I tried to believe that, another part of me, the part that still remembered who I used to be, whispered, "No, Lily. You saw something. You're not imagining this." The next morning, I caught Jenna whispering with Ethan near the break room. When I walked in, they stopped talking immediately. Her voice was bright and fake. "Oh, hey, Lily. We were just discussing the new proposal. So exciting, right?" Ethan didn't even look at me. "You'll get the summary later." And then they walked away together. The sight shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. But betrayal rarely announces itself clearly. It hides behind smiles and friendly gestures. I started noticing more. The way she laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, the way he lingered near her desk, the way projects shifted quietly from my hands to hers. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was strategy. And I was the target. The strain began showing. My sleep suffered. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind running through every word, every meeting, every look, trying to understand where I went wrong. My friends noticed I'd grown quiet. I told them I was fine. I lied. I kept replaying Ethan's voice in my head, "Don't take it personally." But how could I not? The company that once felt like my dream now felt like a slow, silent trap. Yet somewhere inside that fog of exhaustion and doubt, a sharper thought began to form, fragile but growing. If Ethan was willing to humiliate me once, he'd do it again. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I started paying closer attention to his every move. That night, before leaving, I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Observations. Inside, I started keeping track, subtle changes in leadership, shifts in finances, new client lists, every inconsistency I noticed. I told myself it was just for clarity, for my own peace of mind. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just documentation. This was preparation. There's a special kind of silence that comes before everything falls apart, the kind where your instincts scream, but your mind keeps whispering, no, it can't be. That's where I was, somewhere between denial and the truth. Weeks passed since I'd started the Observations folder. I told myself it was harmless. Just data. Notes. But every entry painted a darker picture, tiny patterns that, when connected, formed something undeniable. And it all pointed back to Ethan. The first real crack appeared on a Wednesday morning. I received a call from a long-term client, Harper Dynamics, a company I'd personally brought into the firm 2 years ago. The CFO sounded confused. Hey Lily, I got your invoice update, but it lists Jenna as project lead now. Did you get promoted or something? My stomach dropped. I'm not sure what you mean, I said, forcing calm. He forwarded the email to me. It was from Ethan, written as if I had stepped down from the project, citing internal restructuring and performance optimization. But the kicker? It was dated 3 weeks ago. He'd replaced me quietly. Without a word. Without even pretending it was temporary. I stared at the email until the text blurred. That's when it hit me. The humiliation in that meeting months ago wasn't a one-time mockery. It was the start of my erasure. That night, I stayed late again, long after the janitor had done his rounds. I opened the shared financial drives, digging deeper than I ever had before. Ethan had left digital fingerprints everywhere, contracts rerouted, budgets adjusted, bonuses redirected. And buried beneath layers of permissions, I found a new subsidiary account under a different name. EJ Strategies LLC. Ethan. Jenna. My pulse quickened. I opened the financial sheet. There it was, projects from our company being funneled into their private firm. Clients I had built trust with, resources I had secured, all quietly stolen and repackaged under their brand. It was corporate theft. And I had been the stepping stone. The meeting where they mocked me wasn't just public humiliation. It was strategic, a way to weaken my credibility so no one would believe me when I noticed things going wrong. They had laughed while stealing everything I had worked for. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop the sob that tore through me. My whole body shook, anger, grief, betrayal crashing into each other like waves. How could I have missed it? All those smiles. The empty praise. The slow isolation. It wasn't accidental, it was orchestration. And I had trusted him. I had defended him. I closed the laptop and sank into my chair. The room felt too big, too cold, too quiet. For the first time, I let myself cry, not just from hurt, but from realization. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, meetings, reports, fake smiles, while my mind screamed in the background. Every time I saw Ethan or Jenna, the air felt thicker. She'd flash that innocent grin, tapping her pen against her notebook, pretending she wasn't part of the con. He'd give me those cold, managerial nods, like nothing had changed. But it had. Everything had. I started noticing their whispers. The way they'd step out of rooms when I entered. The way my access to files started disappearing. I was being shut out, piece by piece. And for a while, I blamed myself. I replayed every moment where I could have spoken up, where I could have questioned him. Every time I chose loyalty over logic. Every time I stayed silent because I didn't want to seem difficult. I had let them play me. That truth hurt more than anything else. The breaking point came on a Friday morning. Ethan called for a team meeting. Everyone gathered, department heads, analysts, interns, the whole floor. He stood at the front with Jenna beside him, both of them glowing with fake confidence. As of today, he announced, Jenna will be promoted to senior partner, overseeing our upcoming mergers. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. My ears rang. He didn't look at me once. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was execution. When the clapping died down, Jenna took the floor. I'm so grateful to Ethan for believing in me. And, of course, to Lily for her early mentorship. You've been such an inspiration. The room turned to me, smiling, nodding as if this were all a friendly succession. I forced a smile that felt like glass cutting my face. Congratulations, I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was breaking. And in that exact moment, I realized something. The pain wasn't killing me anymore. It was fueling me. The humiliation that once burned now felt cold, sharp, controlled. That's when I decided they wouldn't see my tears again. Not one. That evening, I went home and opened my laptop. I didn't delete the observations folder. I expanded it. I backed up every file, every screenshot, every message. I documented the financial theft in detail, the rerouted contracts, the client transfers, even internal emails showing their signatures. Each line of evidence was like a matchstick in a box. They thought they'd ended me in that meeting. But what they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that I wasn't broken. I was becoming quiet, calculated, dangerous. And soon, they'd understand the kind of revenge that doesn't shout, it builds. Sometimes, it takes being broken to realize no one's coming to pick up the pieces but you. The Monday after Jenna's promotion, I walked into the office like a ghost. People smiled politely, avoiding my eyes as if my quiet humiliation might be contagious. My desk had been moved to optimize space according to the memo. In truth, it was to make room for Jenna's new glass-walled office that now gleamed right where mine used to be. Every step I took that day felt heavy, not with sadness, but with finality. I had reached the edge of something. And on the other side of that edge, I didn't see despair anymore. I saw clarity. That evening, I didn't go home. I took a cab to the old pier at Westport, a place my father used to bring me when I was younger. He always said the sea reminded him that everything moves, everything changes, no matter how still it looks on the surface. I sat on a weathered bench, the wind cutting through my coat, the city lights reflecting on the water. For the first time in months, I stopped thinking about Ethan and Jenna. Instead, I thought about me, who I used to be before I let people like them define my worth. Before I started saying, it's fine, to every cut, every insult, every stolen opportunity, just to keep the peace. And that's when it hit me. I had been waiting. Waiting for someone to notice the injustice. Waiting for HR to step in. Waiting for karma to do the heavy lifting. But karma doesn't work without action. My father's voice echoed in my head, something he told me before he passed. If they close the door on you, build your own damn building. The words settled in my chest like fire. That's it, I thought. No one's coming. No rescue. No miracle email. No apology that will make it right. It's just me. And that realization, instead of breaking me, finally set me free. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring at my laptop. I opened the observations folder and renamed it Blueprint. Because that's what it had become. Evidence wasn't enough anymore. Proof could expose them, sure, but exposure fades. I wanted something bigger. Something permanent. I started researching business acquisition laws, startup investment structures, silent partnerships. I spent hours reading case studies, listening to finance podcasts, watching interviews with self-made CEOs. For weeks, my apartment became both a classroom and a war room. By day, I showed up at work, calm, polite, invisible. By night, I was studying like my life depended on it. Because it did. One night, after hours of research, I stumbled upon a line that stopped me cold. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's ownership. It was from an article about hostile takeovers, when small, underestimated investors quietly by controlling shares of a company until they own it. And, just like that, the fog lifted. I realized I didn't want to just get back at Ethan and Jenna. I wanted to take everything they thought was theirs. The same boardroom where they laughed at me? I'd sit at the head of it. The same company they used to crush me? I'd make it my empire. But first, I needed leverage. I needed money. And I had just enough to start. For the next few months, I lived a double life. By day, I was quiet, diligent Lily, the woman they thought they'd broken. By night, I was building something new. I took a side consulting job with one of our smaller clients, helping them with strategic proposals under a non-compete loophole Ethan had overlooked. The income wasn't much at first, but it grew steadily. Every dollar I saved became a seed. I networked silently, met with other women who had faced similar betrayals, mentors, investors, ex-colleagues who respected me more than I ever realized. Slowly, piece by piece, I started constructing my comeback. The true turning point came one evening during an investor meetup. A woman named Olivia, a sharp-minded venture capitalist, listened to my story, not the emotional version, but the business side. "You have grit," she said simply. "Most people would have quit after what they did to you. But you didn't. You studied." She leaned forward, her eyes calculating but kind. "If you ever want backing for something new, something that burns a little, call me." I walked out of that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, tangible, electric hope. That night, I stood by my window, looking out at the city lights, the same skyline where Ethan and Jenna probably sat in some fancy office, laughing over wine, thinking they'd won. I smiled. Because for the first time, I wasn't replaying their betrayal. I was rewriting it. The pain was still there, sharp, familiar, but it wasn't weakness anymore. It was fuel. They had mocked me in front of everyone, trying to make me small. And without realizing it, they had given me the one thing they couldn't control, a reason to rise higher than I ever planned to. I closed my laptop, wrote one line on a sticky note, and stuck it to my mirror. "No one's coming. Become who you needed." It wasn't a mantra. It was a declaration. I looked at my reflection, tired eyes, determined jaw, a quiet storm building behind them. They thought they broke me, but all they did was wake me up. Revenge, I learned, is not a feverish sprint. It's a patient architecture. It's blueprints and scaffolding, small acts that look harmless until the whole structure is complete. After the pier, after Olivia's promise of backing, I stopped hoping for miracles and started making them. First rule, never rush a blueprint. I turned my blueprint folder into a living dossier. Every invoice I'd found. Every rerouted contract. Screenshots of Jenna's emails, timestamps showing her sign-offs. The hidden LLC accounts tied to Ethan. I cross-referenced, annotated, and color-coded until the evidence read like a confession. Doing it calmed me. Each file I saved felt like a stone set in place under my feet. Second rule, use their arrogance against them. They believed I was broken, bruised, polite, non-threatening. That mistake would be their undoing. So I cultivated an appearance of complacency. I kept showing up early, smiling when they expected it, answering emails in a warm, overly casual tone. I let Jenna bask in the glow of her promotion. I let Ethan preen. While they scattered crumbs of power, I gathered the recipe. Olivia became more than a backer, she became a strategist. We met at a quiet cafe where we could speak without office years. She listened without pity, then asked the questions that sharpened my plan. Who benefits? Who signs? Who profits? We mapped the web of influence and identified the soft spots: vendors, junior accountants, a complacent compliance officer, and one external auditor who liked a good glass of wine too much. Third rule, recruit quietly. I reached out to people who knew the truth but had no way to speak without losing everything. James, the client contact at Harper Dynamics, had been furious when Ethan replaced me. He wanted justice, not headlines. He introduced me to a procurement manager at another client who had noticed sudden billing anomalies. A junior analyst, quietly ambitious and resentful at being passed over, agreed to monitor internal changes and forward me anything suspicious, with anonymity guaranteed. Small allies, yes, but they gave me access I couldn't buy with money alone. Fourth rule, set social traps. People reveal what they are when they're comfortable. Ethan loved praise, Jenna loved company retreats, and both loved to celebrate success publicly. I arranged, casually and politely, to attend industry mixers and volunteer panels where they were scheduled to speak. I smiled and applauded while planting seeds. To the right ears I hinted, funny how some projects seemed to move off the books. To the right journalists I mentioned minor discrepancies I'd noticed in vendor lists. I never lied, I simply spoke truths framed as offhand remarks, truth that looked like gossip until corroborated. Fifth rule, let them overreach. With Olivia's backing and a small consortium of silent investors, I bought a modest stake in a small competitor, just enough to make introductions at investor tables without seeming threatening. In the same breath, I whispered to the right people that I was exploring strategic partnerships. Suddenly, vendors who had been feeding Ethan's shell company began to appear at my meetings. I treated them with professional courtesy and asked obvious-sounding questions about invoicing and subcontractors. They answered, oblivious. Over time, patterns emerged. Emotionally, this work was a strange bomb. Every time a document arrived from an ally, every time a junior analyst handed me a screenshot, the old humiliation cooled into something like purpose. But the night work was the hardest, the quiet loneliness of compiling evidence while the city slept. I would read an email thread showing Ethan's signature authorizing a transfer, then picture him laughing at that meeting, and my hands would tremble. That's when I'd reread my father's line, if they close the door on you, build your own damn building. So I built, slowly, deliberately. There were risks. Once, Jenna nearly caught me forwarding a vendor invoice to our compliance contact under an anonymous alias. Her head turned toward my desk with dangerous curiosity, but I only looked up and smiled, the same glass smile I'd practiced 1,000 times. Busy night, I said. She shrugged and turned back to her champagne-colored world. She never suspected that the calm woman at the next desk could be piecing together a case that would one day make her whole life public. I also set an emotional trap. At a charity gala where Jenna was meant to be center stage, I arranged for Harper Dynamics CFO to be seated near her table. He'd been quietly angered by Ethan's commandeering of his account and was eager to ask a few pointed questions about vendor relationships. Jenna's polished answers slipped, revealing more than she intended. I watched the tide of the room shift subtly, the way conversation thinned around her, how attendees started comparing notes afterwards. That night, she left earlier than planned, pale and irritated. She thought she'd escaped scrutiny. Instead, she'd walked into it. The months that followed were a weave of small victories and near misses. Ethan kept believing the woman he'd mocked was harmless. He'd cackle with the leadership team about his talent management. He didn't know I'd hired a forensic accountant on Olivia's referral, or that the analyst had found duplicate invoices flowing to EJ Strategies LLC. He didn't know that I'd quietly offered to buy small shares from disgruntled minor shareholders in our company, positions that, combined with a few well-timed investor alliances, would one day let me sit at a table where his laughter would mean nothing. Every move felt deliberate and personal, not petty, but precise. Sometimes I would catch myself smiling at the thought of Ethan's face when the audit report landed on his desk. Other times I felt hollow, surprised by how much effort it took to be patient. But patience is a muscle, and I was training mine. By the time I walked into another Monday meeting months later, I was still the same Lily to their eyes, polite, quietly confident, harmless. Inside, I was a coiled force. The dossier sat encrypted on a private drive. My investors were briefed. The forensic accountant had a timeline. The trap was not a single snap, it was a crescendo. And as I took my seat and watched Ethan begin to talk, I felt the old sensation in the pit of my stomach, not dread, but a quiet, satisfied anticipation. They thought they'd won. They had no idea the harvest had already been sown. The morning of the shareholder meeting felt like the calm before something that had already begun to happen, the kind of stillness that holds a held breath. I dressed in a simple navy suit, nothing flashy, hair pulled back, lipstick the color of steadiness. Whatever happened today, I wanted my face to read the one thing I felt inside, composed, unshakable. Investors filled the room in tidy rows, murmuring beneath a ceiling of glass. The board sat at the elongated table up front, Ethan smiling that practiced smile as if the world still bent to him. Jenna arrived late, laughing with the senior partners, champagne glow clinging to her. They had no idea the ground under their feet was no longer theirs. I walked in with Olivia at my side and took a seat in the third row, exactly where I intended to be, visible but overlooked. When the CEO began his preamble, I watched Ethan relax, the way predators do when they think the hunt is over. Then the slides began. First came the forensic accountant's report, a clean, brutal timeline. It started innocuously, duplicate invoices, subcontractor discrepancies, then a living map of funds funneled into EJ Strategies LLC. The slides showed client names, dates, red arrows leading to the shell company. The room went quiet the way a held breath becomes a collective intake. Ethan's smile thinned. Olivia stood and spoke, slow and steady, not like someone delivering a verdict, but like someone reading the weather. She explained the chain, how vendors were paid twice, how value disappeared into shadow companies, how certain contracts had been reclassified to hide profit leakage. She did not say who did it. She didn't have to. Then I pulled out my phone and, with a calm that surprised even me, projected the email chain onto the screen. There it was, Ethan's signature authorizing a transfer, Jenna's name CC'd, timestamps matching the invoices. The room shifted. Conversations stuttered. Faces went pale. Ethan rose, throat tight. That's forged. Fabricated. His voice sounded small. Olivia's eyes were like steel. We had independent verification. The firm that did this analysis has verified metadata from your office printer. The transfers trace back to accounts linked to EJ Strategies. There is no fabrication, Mr. Cole. There is a trail. Jenna stood too, face flushed. This is slander. You're trying to ruin reputations. I stood then, and the room turned a little more. I did not shout. I did not plead. I allowed silence to be my amplifier. Do you remember the day you laughed at me? I asked, voice even. Do you remember how loud you were? How confident? A few heads nodded, discomfort spreading. You thought that mockery erased the work. But mockery doesn't end projects. It hides truth. I walked to the head of the table and laid the dossier on the polished wood, annotated invoices, bank statements, vendor confirmations, the forensic report, the email threads. Each page was a small, undeniable hammer. I had no need to theatrically accuse. The documents did the work. People leaned in, readers of the room now compelled into witnesses. An independent auditor, present at Olivia's request, cleared his throat. Given these findings, the board is recommending an immediate freeze on all accounts linked to EJ Strategies and a temporary suspension of Mr. Cole and Ms. Hart pending full investigation. He spoke with the nervous dignity of someone who has just told a harsh truth but is relieved to have done so. The color left Ethan's face in waves. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. The partners exchanged glances, the quiet betrayal of people who'd trusted the wrong shepherds. Outside the room, journalists who'd sniffed a whisper were waiting. The first headline blared by noon: top execs accused in financial misconduct, board suspends CEO. Social media unfurled like a river of commentary. Their private bravado collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny. The people who had once chuckled at my awkwardness now whispered about ethics and audits and the fallibility of charm. But the more satisfying part was quieter. The vendors who'd fed into EJ Strategies began to call the company to clarify payments. One by one, checks were stopped, contracts revoked. Clients who'd been kept in the dark demanded restitution. The money dried up where it had been laundered, collapsing the phantom profit structure Ethan and Jenna had relied on. They tried to run. Ethan scheduled emergency meetings, issued statements, arranged damage control. Jenna posted a demurely contrite note on LinkedIn about misunderstandings. The PR people spun and spun until their threads frayed. But spin can't remake ledgers or negate forensic evidence. The most poetic sting came later that week when I quietly executed the next phase of my plan. Using the small but strategic shares Olivia and our investors had helped me acquire, I called for an extraordinary vote. It passed. The chairmanship shifted. The company that had been a theater for their arrogance now had a new steward, a woman they had mocked into silence. I did not gloat when I signed the papers. I signed them with the same steady hand I'd used to annotate my dossier. I walked back to my office, the space they'd once reserved for me as if it were a consolation, and sat at the head of a table that now listened. Grace, I learned, is not the absence of fury. It is the choice to be calm when the world burns around you, to let truth be the conflagration. I had been broken, cut, humiliated. Those wounds had shaped me into a craftsman of consequence. And as the company's new direction unfolded under my guidance, I felt something like vindication, but quieter, completion. There was a moment in the weeks after Ethan packed his office in silence. Jenna's contacts dwindled, legal teams circled, reputations unraveled. People who'd mocked me avoided my gaze in elevators, in corridors, in the same conference rooms where they'd once laughed. Their laughter, once a blade, now felt small and corrosion-worn. From my window that evening, I watched the city take on its evening lights. The skyline glimmered, indifferent and honest. I closed my laptop and allowed myself one unguarded breath. The revenge had been executed not with shrill triumph, but with precision, not to ruin, but to restore. And as the city hummed below, a calm settled through me, the quiet of someone who's reclaimed what was taken, who has turned mockery into momentum and pain into a plan that worked. The storm had passed. The harvest was complete. The storm had passed. Weeks slipped into months, and the echo of that shareholder meeting faded into company folklore. The day Truth walked into the boardroom wearing calm like armor. Ethan and Jenna were gone. Their names lingered in archived reports and whispered stories told over cautious coffee breaks. The company rebuilt itself around transparency, something it had never truly known before. As for me, I didn't celebrate. Not in the way people expected. There were no champagne glasses clinking or victory speeches. My revenge hadn't been about noise. It had always been about reclaiming my dignity in silence. What I felt was peace, layered with the faint ache of lessons learned too hard and too deep. I spent the first quiet evening alone in my office, the same office where, a year ago, I had cried behind closed blinds after being humiliated in that infamous meeting. The city lights glowed against the glass walls, the hum of traffic below steady and alive. I stood there, watching, remembering. I remembered their laughter. The whispers that followed me down hallways. The long hours I worked while they mocked my dedication as desperation. Back then, I had believed that success was something others granted. Now I understood. It's something you claim when you finally decide no one can define your worth but you. Revenge hadn't made me cruel. It made me conscious. I didn't destroy them for sport. I simply removed their power from my story. And in that space, the one they tried to fill with their arrogance, I built something that mattered. People started coming to me, not to gossip, but to ask for advice, for mentorship, for direction. Some admitted quietly that they'd seen what happened, but had been too afraid to speak up. I didn't blame them. Fear makes cowards of even the kindest souls. But I told them something I wish someone had told me: integrity doesn't need applause. It just needs consistency. Olivia and I became a team, building a new culture from the ashes, one where ideas mattered more than status, and listening was more powerful than talking. Slowly, the company shifted. Clients returned. The media, once hungry for scandal, began writing stories about redemption and reform. Sometimes, I'd catch myself smiling when someone mentioned Ethan's name, not out of bitterness, but because it no longer stung. He had been the test I didn't know I needed. Without his betrayal, I would never have learned the architecture of resilience. Because here's the truth no one tells you about poetic justice: it isn't about seeing others fall. It's about watching yourself rise, differently, quietly, unshakably. One evening, months later, I was invited to speak at a leadership conference. The topic was Grace Under Fire. Standing under those bright stage lights, facing a crowd of faces filled with ambition and fear and hope, I told my story. Not the scandal, not the revenge, but the transformation. I was laughed at in a meeting, I said. I was underestimated, dismissed, and discarded. And for a while, I believed them. I thought their approval was the currency of my worth. But the truth is, every laugh, every slight, every insult became a spark. They didn't break me. They built me, piece by piece, into something they couldn't control. The audience was silent, listening the way people do when truth hits something buried. I ended with a line I hadn't planned. It just slipped out, like it had been waiting to be said all along. They mocked me when I had nothing. But when I finally had everything, I didn't need to mock them back. My success spoke in a language they could never learn: silence and strength. The applause that followed wasn't for the downfall of others, it was for the rise of self-worth. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Later that night, walking home through the soft city air, I looked up at the skyline, the same one I'd watched when everything had fallen apart. But this time, it didn't feel distant. It felt like reflection glass, showing me who I'd become. Not the woman they ridiculed. Not the broken voice in the corner of a meeting. But the woman who built an empire from ashes, not to prove them wrong, but to prove herself right. And maybe that's the true art of revenge, when justice becomes less about punishment and more about peace. So tell me, have you ever been betrayed by someone who laughed at your pain? Did you rise quietly, or did you let the world see your fire? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes your scars are someone else's survival guide. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe, not for me, but for the part of you that refuses to stay broken. Because in the end, they mocked me in the meeting. But I bought the company next year. And that will forever be my favorite kind of poetic justice.